All right, here we are. Charles Moscowitz. Welcome to the program, Monday through Friday, 12 noon Eastern Standard Time on YouTube and subscribing platforms. Dooovid is joining me at today. As he does every Thursday. We usually discuss religion, we discuss moral and ethical issues. Dooovid, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, Shalom. Pleasure to be back. Thanks for having me.
Now, Dooovid, you seem to have some kind of breaking news over there in Michigan, where you are in Greater Detroit, with regard to your Secretary of State. Do you want to tell us about it?
None of this is breaking news. All this is very well known. I was just putting two to two, together in a certain way that maybe other people who aren't as booked up would know. And I was thinking about that. Really, the SPLC defeated Trump in Michigan, and
How so?
it was. There's a variety of factors. I just looked at our Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, that took an extremely unorthodox career path to become Secretary of State, but it was in fact a board member of the SPLC.
And how did they do? First of all, Jocelyn Benson is she's a Wellesley graduate. She's elected Secretary of State in Michigan.
And Harvard JD.
Exactly, and she also is the one who told the two canvassers in Wayne County that there would be no audit of Wayne County in the election. They were willing to agree to certify the vote there in exchange for a full audit, which is a perfectly reasonable thing for them to request. That's their job, to confirm the vote was kosher, if you will. And she refused to do so. Then she went on record as saying there was no need for it because the vote in Wayne County was perfectly kosher. So, to my way of thinking, you have a political hack there, somebody who understands that she's probably the one person in the United States that can stop Trump from his reelection by denying him Michigan, because where Michigan goes, the country goes. And that if there had been an audit in that county, which has an enormous amount of documented fraud by people who have sworn affidavits, I think there's over 100, then probably Wayne County would be taken away from the Biden column, and Trump would take Michigan.
Yes, I'm a political hack, so to say, even though I'm kind of Jehovah's Witness when it comes to voting and distrust everybody equally. I knew this was happening as it was happening. It was obvious. I was on Luke Ford. I was talking about these feminist women in Detroit and how active in even the larger Jewish community in doing this, and even how basically to get like a reform bar mitzvah these days, you like probably 25% of kids do voter registration. That's how we become Jews. I say that's a fact, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
But I'm saying so this is unsurprising in that this exceptionally brilliant woman, Jocelyn Benson, Harvard JD, who was basically working distributing money for a billionaire, Stephen Ross, one of the wealthiest people in the world, Detroit native, nephew of a billionaire, Max Fisher, and alumni of Wayne State University. This woman was dean of a law school. She left that to work for private distribution of charities for Stephen Ross, and then all the meantime she's a board member of the SPLC, and then runs for Secretary of State with the explicit purpose of carrying out this agenda of voter registration, mail-in voting, to defeat Trump. None of this is a conspiracy. She openly said it. She won in an open election. She said this is why she was running. And she said this is what she was going to do when she ran in 2018. And from some perspective, you could just look back and say, this woman did exactly what she said she was going to do.
Now, is this something, Dooovid, that is being covered by the media in Michigan?
Honestly, I think it's conceptually too complicated for the media to cover. From like a legal perspective, I'm not insulting. I'm generally praising the woman, despite say maybe disagree about her motives. I doubt she broke any laws. She might have enabled conditions.
No, I don't think so either.
That I'm saying this woman was dean of a law school, Harvard law school alumni. Like, I'm sure she knew how to, like do it within the laws as they're written, or even, I mean, she had the laws changed. She said she ran for Secretary of State because she wanted to change the laws, and she wanted to change the laws because she had worked for the SPLC and understood these issues.
Well, look, I don't think there's anything illegal about her being affiliated with the SPLC and pushing liberal registration and pushing for, the liberal, pre-vote and post-vote and all the other means that they have legally, even though it's one step ahead of the law. I don't think there's anything, flat out illegal about any of that. I think it's unseemly. I think it's unethical, but it's not illegal. But the ability of her as a Secretary of State to actually make laws, that's a legal question, because the only authority in the state of Michigan or in any state to make laws is the legislature, especially election laws. And that, in fact, this is going to the Supreme Court in Pennsylvania right now, because the the judicial court in the state of Pennsylvania changed the laws that had been made by the legislature, and that the U.S. Constitution says that only state legislatures shall decide such matters. So I think that she was acting unconstitutionally in her attempt to make laws. That doesn't mean she did anything illegal. It just means that in our system of checks and balances, that can be challenged and should be challenged on the Supreme Court level. But yet you seem to be, but yet the business of her declaring, almost like by fiat, that there had been no voter fraud in Wayne County, even though there are, there's sworn testimony from a lot of people about that. To me, that might cross into the area of illegality, because that's, or at least it's corruption. I mean, that's, it's just, and it's unfathomable. I mean, I'm hoping to see, I know that yesterday.
You're not a lawyer. This woman was dean of a law school. I'm sure she's thought this out. And legal experts have determined and saying from yes, she is going to do everything legally within her power as Secretary of State to see to it that Biden wins, presumably, and not saying without breaking the law, at least in theory. And you can say maybe she would go as far as
no, I'm not saying she did break the law.
That's up, but to even question, of course, that's obvious. That's why that was what she campaigned on.
Yeah, no, and I'm not saying she broke the law flat out in terms of criminal.
Now, how many people
behavior.
seriously look into Secretary of State elections? And if you look at the long-term strategy of, let's say George Soros, SPLC, certain people who understood the demographic, it's just like the Republicans and the alt-right, everybody, it's America. You got to run for elections. You want to change something, you have to avow yourself to the system. But the SPLC had a long-term strategy, and it worked.
And they had a right to do it.
They changed the law in multiple states. It was probably expedited by COVID-19. Had it not been for COVID-19, the strategy might have failed, and we would still have Trump as president. But because of COVID-19, these things that had already put in place, largely, probably due to the genius legal minds at the SPLC or whoever's behind that, had already had these measures put in place in multiple states going back years, and a lot of Republicans are people. He's who the hell cares who is Secretary of State? Why is that a contested election?
No, I mean, I think you're right, and it's probably in many states. In fact, a lot of states were changing laws right up to the eve of the election, and very, very sneaky and very corrupt, but yet technically not illegal, probably, although challengeable on a Supreme Court level. And as somebody like Benson and the SPLC, these people, it's like the Clintons. They're brilliant lawyers, and they know how to operate one step ahead of the law. They know how to manipulate the law in such a way that they're able to pull threads to make things technically legal. I mean,
well, they're lawyers. They're not. I mean, Trump's not a lawyer. Right. She's actually a lawyer. I mean, Trump would be like that too, but he's not a lawyer.
Well, you'd be like that if you were a corrupt lawyer. I mean,
no, all lawyers. That's every lawyer's job.
No. It's not necessarily the case that every lawyer wants to use the law.
That's what Trump said. That's what Trump said. He's like, I'm smart. No one pays extra taxes. It's a lawyer's job to
the thing is that
benefit their client to the most extent possible within the letter of the law.
Yeah, but we're talking about public policy here, not someone's private business. And in
both.
The area
even public policy, you're saying we have a media narrative about altruism, but factually we have a spoil system, and the spoil system is factually based on a system where when you win elections, you get to do everything within the power of the law to benefit the people who helped you get into office. And the people might espouse a more altruistic, vision of who they are.
But the thing is,
and you might critique politicians, but the law itself is set up in a way that it is a spoil system, and the benefit of winning is you do get to do everything within the limits of the law to benefit.
Some people actually are guided.
Yeah, that's your claim. So
compass.
I'm saying that no, 0 people are guided by anything higher than that. And so you could claim that there's some people that are guided by higher things. You could claim, but I'm going with the base assumption that nobody is guided by anything higher than that.
I assume that enough people are not trying to manipulate. They may be lawyers, but they're not trying to use the letter of the law to manipulate things in a corrupt way. I don't think everyone's doing that. Maybe I'm naive, but no.
So that's Adam Smith in capitalism. You're supposed to do that.
You're not supposed to do it for corrupt means. You see, Adam Smith.
Corrupt means. I mean, what's the difference between illegal and corrupt? And you're saying corrupt is when it doesn't actually break the letter of the law, but yet it is corrupt.
Yeah, but it has an ill intent. And look, Dooovid, I think that
I'm saying you're making the natural false assumption, saying, of course, people have ill intent. The system was designed assuming that all people, whether they try or not, are going to act out of ill intent. There is no perfect person who doesn't act out of ill intent.
No perfect person, but then there are matters of degrees. I mean, someone can have an open agenda, as apparently did the Secretary of State, to subvert, not break, but subvert.
How is it subvert if it was open? She ran on it. It's still on her. It's still on her resume that she works for the SPLC. She's proud of it.
But I think when the average person seeing that didn't assume that she was going to use those powers to go beyond, to the degree.
But, I mean, it's not subversion. You would say like Hitler, God forbid, wasn't subversion because he said what he was going to do. But, right, this woman said what she was going to do. She didn't secretly do it behind closed doors.
And that's terrible that it was not reported that way. And also to
it wasn't reported that way. I forward you articles. These articles going back years ago.
Okay. I mean,
the Republicans attacked her for this years ago, and she won the election anyways.
First of all, I blame Trump.
That's why I told you, I didn't break any news today. These are news stories. No,
I blame Trump,
ago.
And I blame the Republicans for not having further exposed this a year ago, while they still could have, rather than wait till after an election. That's incompetence. But putting that aside, the idea of using the law to cover up what is consciously and knowably crimes committed in terms of voter fraud, that is maybe not legally, technically illegal, but it's immoral and it's corrupt. And not all people do that. Now, I want to get to another issue here, Dooovid, maybe one that's a little bit more moral. And I was thinking about talking about this with you today. And that is that yesterday was Thanksgiving, and my family, my immediate family, we had it here at our home. But because of the COVID virus, we didn't have a big Thanksgiving get together with relatives. And so we did a Zoom meeting and we each talked a little bit during that. And my relatives are all conventional liberal Democrats. We're not talking about people who are very deeply into politics. They're just average Democrats who want their side to win and who hate Donald Trump for reasons that they can't really explain, but I don't get into it. And I didn't really talk during the meeting because everyone knows that I'm not of their ilk, and I'm kind of seen and not heard, other than to say hello. And that's fine. But something came up that involved a federal judge in Pennsylvania who is related by marriage to one of my relatives, and who basically ruled on the Trump rulings, the Trump case brought by Giuliani, and didn't even look at the case. He just dismissed it out of hand. Now it's moving to the Supreme Court, and that is the case that could decide the Pennsylvania election. And their attitude about this was, oh, this is, we're going to win. We're not going to let this happen. We're in the middle of this great battle. And one of the relatives who is from Pennsylvania, she's like, yes, I'm right in the belly of the beast here, and we're going to get through this, and we're going to beat them, and we're going to win it, and we're under assault. And this brings up, in retrospect, in my mind, a moral question, which is that obviously none of these people care one way or the other about whether there was voter fraud, whether the election is being stolen. They don't want to see it. And this is, but they know it's true. And yet, and this is putting aside the censorious media that they watch that doesn't discuss this at all, or if they do so, they analyze it in a most negative light. Put in their heart of hearts, they know there are some issues going on here, and they don't care. They don't want to know. They just want to win. And it's really unseemly. Now, if I would agree with that if, for example, Donald Trump were Hitler, and I don't think they really believe the propaganda that says he's evil. Everyone knows that's crap. But he's not, obviously. He's a legitimate candidate for president, and he's had a successful record, whether you like him or not. And so the idea that they would they would be willing to subvert voters, knowing in their minds that he probably did win those states, just to win, just to get their guy in, just to stop this evil, the orange man, is troubling to me. I mean, it brings up a moral question. I mean, do they not care about the legitimate will of the voter? What about the principle of one man, one vote? What do you think, Dooovid?
Well, I mean, I've been telling you for the whole time, like, I never bought that. I thought the democratic process is conducive to larger amounts of corruption, and just the way to frame that, and like that, the fact that you voted for somebody that makes decisions for you, and that you had some choice between two people, or even the ability to run and be that person yourself, is really quite limited. And that generally people's concern with politics brings out bad character trait, as we've discussed the last few weeks. And it's essentially what you're saying. Like even I say this mostly as a chess coach, because chess is a game where at the end of the day someone wins and someone loses, and from a factual point, the purpose of the game is to win. But we're saying it's right. The whole reason we play to win in politics.
Yeah, but there are rules in chess. You can't cheat.
Well, it is. Politics is basically the same way. The purpose is to win,
but not to cheat, not to win through cheating.
Well, you're making a different point, because that's why I wouldn't even intersperse the words good and evil within politics of itself. I mean, the system is designed that whoever wins gets to do everything legally in their power to benefit the people that helped them win, and to punish the people that were against them. That's the factual.
Well, we're talking about the process of winning, though.
Well, I'm talking about the essence that the U.S. governmental system factually works that way. Whether a person portrays themselves in order to win elections doesn't change that that's the way the system is designed. And the system is also designed presuming that both sides are going to try to cheat. The people who designed the U.S. system assumed, Charles Moscowitz, if you don't admit that you and your side are going to try to cheat, you are lying. I still assume that you and your side are going to try to cheat. And that's the way the system is designed. It's supposed to be that way.
Look, Dooovid, that's human nature. I mean, corruption, you're right, is part of the system. It's always going to be, always will be, always has been. But that doesn't mean that you condone it. That doesn't mean you look the other way. I mean, you have to have a balance.
It does, because there's a legal value of it's like a game, and someone wins, someone loses. You have to respect the legal system. So if President Trump pardons General Flynn, and that's it, we don't get to go after him. You maybe attack his reputation, or we have to respect the legal system, and there's a spoil system.
Yeah, the legal system is one man, one vote.
I mean, you just mentioned, there's a judge. And it could be a criminal case or a commercial case, but at the end of the day, there's a decision. And as a U.S. citizen, you have to respect it. So,
that's why it's going to the Supreme Court, because that decision is contested. I mean, there's that judge.
People could lose confidence in the system in totality, and that's what I'm saying is happening. And
look, that judge has a right to make that decision, even though it appears to have been corrupt because he didn't look at the evidence. However, he has a right to do it. And it has been appealed, and now it's going to finally work its way to the Supreme Court, where you have more sober people who are going to take a harder look at it, I hope. But either way, of course there's corruption. That's human nature. But it's our obligation as citizens, as Jews, I would argue, to try to identify it and expose it and call it out so that at least there's some balance. And because if we don't, then we're going to slip into the abyss of full corruption like Sodom and Gomorrah. We have to combat corruption by sunlight. I think it was Louis Brandeis who made a comment about that. He said that the best antidote to corruption is sunlight.
Well, that's why I said, like, okay, if you're in the base medrash trying to learn Torah or some positive essence, is okay, maybe this guy's really trying to be a good person and combat corruption. But if you're involved in politics, you have to assume that corruption is the majority motive.
Yes, you do assume it, but it's shocking
to saying, like, no, if you really wanted to be a good person and make the world a better place, you wouldn't be a talk show host talking about politics. I mean, it doesn't mean you're a bad person or unconcerned, but it's saying, like, no, there's no saints in politics. If you wanted to be a saint,
but that's why you
wouldn't be
have
involved
a system
in
of
politics.
laws. You have a system of laws and not men. And what shocks me about what I observed in my family, and I'm not singling them out because I think they're typical, is that it was not just a disregard for trying to get at what is objectively corrupt questions, most likely, maybe not, we should investigate, but their almost dismissive attitude about even attempting it and their virtuousness about opposing any investigation like that. I mean, that's
I'm a gamer, so, like, to me, it's, I mean, you're a host and maybe you're trying to make it dramatic because that's how you keep an audience and be a good talk show host. But I mean, to me, it's like, okay, it's obvious, and it's saying, like, yeah, I mean, the stakes are extremely high, and people are resorting to tactics that in lower stakes they might not. And in essence, I think because me and you have debated with alt-right so much that we may, I mean, I think it's largely multiculturalism, which is the larger battle. And you're saying, like, the Jocelyn Benson coming for the SPLC and these various things about voter registration. Think the underlying issue is the push for multiculturalism and the direction of what it means to be America, and it is a war in that level, and it's saying there is going to be casualties in that war because there's a vision of what America is going to look like, and one is multicultural and some different form than the other side. And that once the stakes get higher, it's like poker. You're saying, like, essentially both sides are bluffing. And because both sides are bluffing, they're not going to tell you crap because it's a high stakes game and giving away anything. That's why, saying Trump, say, is it fraud or is it, whatever? He's got to keep on using the word fraud, just like you got to keep on using the word evil.
Because we think it is fraud. Now, look, Dooovid,
but I'm saying it's at a stake where the stakes are so high,
I understand,
that the other side could, is becoming otherized to the point where it makes sense that both sides are playing such a, like, it's a zero-sum game.
I'll tell you
even from a logical perspective, that society has become a zero-sum game, and as society in the direction of America reduces more to a zero-sum game, you could expect that people will do more and more corrupt, and God forbid, even, like we talk about, as Jews who worry about these things, that eventually, God forbid, the collapse of government and the collapse of law and order and civil society, and could be the worst nightmares that most people fear.
The only issue I'll take with you on this is that I would argue that there likely has been major corruption to the point where states have been switched over by fraudulent means. If in fact I turn out to be wrong about that, if there is a good, fair investigation, and it's going to take a court system to do that because we're not going to get that in the media for sure, or in the government, and I turned out to be wrong, and that there wasn't this widespread corruption, and that in fact Biden did win these states, and that he does have enough electors to become president, then I will accept that. I'll be sad, but I will accept it. And I will go into the loyal opposition, in which case I will then criticize where criticism is warranted and praise where praise is warranted, just like I did during the 4 or 8 years of Obama's administration. I supported Obama as my president, even though I voted against him and I generally disagree with his philosophical approach. And I praised him when I felt he was right, criticized him when I felt he was wrong. So that's the more conservative approach. I'm not going to, but I want to make sure that there wasn't this vote of fraud to the extent where the election is stolen. And I think that there is substantial evidence that there was. I want it to be heard. That's all. I want an honest reckoning, because if we don't have that and we allow voter fraud to take over and install an administration, then that's a very dangerous precedent for this country. And by the way, if that does happen, and Biden is installed without this investigation, and that the voter fraud is successful, then I will still accept him as president, because we have to have an orderly society. But I will continue to try to be active for getting this investigated and getting these machines investigated, so it doesn't happen again. It'll be difficult, but that's what I'll do.
And that's why I thought it was worthwhile to mention, just the SPLC and this woman, Jocelyn
I think it's
Benson,
very interesting.
In that, but I was saying it's not a conspiracy.
No, you're right.
They openly said
illegal.
that
right.
This is what they planned. This is what she said she planned on doing when she ran.
You're absolutely right. And I'm not claiming that there was anything flat out illegal about it. But what I would suggest is that she has used her position in a manner that borders on ethics and morality by stretching the law, not breaking the law, but assuming legal powers where they may not be, and they need to be challenged. And the reason we have a system of justice in this country is so that these things can be challenged and should be challenged in court. Now, if she went ahead and declared something as legal, that's fine. That's what politicians do. But you have to have a constitution, and you have to have a process by which that can be adjudicated. That's all I'm saying. I think if it is adjudicated, they will find that she really doesn't have that kind of authority as Secretary of State to simply make laws, make them up as she goes. It has to be done by elected officials in a state legislature. That is what the Constitution says. So, again, she didn't do anything. They all do this. It's not illegal to try to implement a law. What's problematic is that it's not challenged, and it should be challenged.
Well, Alan Dershowitz, who I've been listening to, good for Alan. I don't know if you ever had him on your show or met him.
A few times. Oh yeah, sure.
But he's just doing what you're doing now. Instead, I used to watch Shalom TV, but now he's just talking straight to the mic and even taking calls. I haven't called his channel, but I've been watching him. And looks like probably the Democrats, and probably wasn't just the SPLC, but a whole conglomerate of forces, legal experts knew that they could get Trump through the GSA to have to cooperate with Biden to become president, and the work that it will take if these ballots are invalid, they'll be able to push it off till after Biden is already made president. And presumably, we're just, that's what they thought of, just like Jocelyn Benson now. Think like, it was a conspiracy. Like, no, there's this woman, Jocelyn Benson, who worked for the SPLC and had been planning on this for years. But also that they knew beforehand that, yes, that even if they are going to eventually lose in the court, that likely they'll be able to push that off till after Biden is made president.
Let me ask you something about this.
That seemed to be what Dershowitz was saying. But it's possible that they'll be able to. But looks like
they're going to drag. They'll run down the clock. They'll dribble the ball until Biden is in. No, I get that. Now,
that they planned this beforehand. That we're just thinking like, that was their strategy. But if you had been doing your job as an investor, and you had been.
Biden himself acknowed this during.
I knew that this was what they were planning on doing. I told people that this was what they're planning on doing.
He said, we've created the largest voter fraud machine in the history of American politics.
I don't think it's voter fraud. I think it's just
it's voter fraud. Anyway, but let me ask you this: the SPLC, are they a public organization or are they private?
Well, it's also interesting that I think they crashed, and this woman Benson is probably doing it on her own, or through contacts or people that she met. And obviously, she knows our Jewish billionaires better than the Jewish community, like Stephen Ross and Dan
She's
Gilbert.
not Jewish herself, by the way, we should know.
Yeah, I don't think so.
No,
although a lot of people think she's Jewish, like just asking around, so. I even thought she was Jewish. And I would guess 1 out of 3 people here probably think that
I don't think she's Jewish. My thoughts on that are anecdotal. It's based on what she looks like, but whatever.
But anyway, that might also be why she's the darling of our billionaires. You're saying like
That's
Stephen
right.
Ross,
They've got a
Ross
nice,
and Dan Gilbert. They're not in on it with the Jewish community. They're in on
they've
it
got
with
a nice shiksi to be the front.
I
Now,
mean,
let me ask, getting back to it, what is the SBLC a public or a private organization?
well, I think they're a private organization, but I mean, I think I don't think she's doing it through the SPLC. I mean, the SPLC is just basically an attack dog. Or, I mean, you could even call it like the ADL to a certain extent. The ADL performs a service for Jews and certain at large.
SBL, wait a minute.
But I was saying for a certain, but largely they're a hired hitman. That
All right,
they're saying the SPLC has issues like voter fraud. And the thing that Dana Benson is saying, like what she did was the main agenda of the SPLC for years, but they're also basically a hired hitman to take political enemies down.
All right, I just put two and two together here.
I mean, do you disagree with that? I was saying the ADL actually in the SPLC perform a function, but they also perform a function of being a hired hitman to take down political enemies.
You know, I just put two and two together here. I probably should have realized this before. I thought the reference to the SBLC, the acronym, was the banking organization that insures deposits. That's the FDIC. I got it all confused here in my mind.
The SBLC
is the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is a very corrupt and troubling organization, very partisan.
But I was saying they're just a hired attack dog of a bigger movement. And
you're saying that Benson worked with them?
She was on the board of directors. It's on her resume.
That's
still.
Horrible.
I'm saying it's on her resume. You don't have to look at a conspiracy. She proudly was a board of director. But I was saying they fell apart. And after the last chairman fell down, she's not affiliated with them directly anymore. And I think there's been a shift in power. And saying, but the larger force that the SBLC was, in my vision, basically mostly a hired hitman in most cases.
Didn't they have this guy exists. Boris Dees? I mean, he was one of the founders who actually, I think he's in prison.
Well, I mean, someone like George Soros obviously would probably align.
Yes, probably a lot of the funding.
SPLC, not even just like George Soros, but plenty of mainstream liberal activists in America.
We have to be careful talking about this on YouTube, so let's just watch it. But
I'm not. I mean, honestly, I think they probably won fair and square from my perspective.
But the point is that there's a lot of questions about them. They're the ones who they accused.
Because we knew they told us what they were trying to do.
Conservative organizations of having something against Black people, and it's very ugly.
That's why I say their main mission was the voter registration, but they also function openly to ruin the lives of those who oppose them, and that's what you see they did. Anybody like you, and you say it yourself that if you're out there saying this stuff, like they will they'll find something. They will pay somebody to try to ruin your life.
I actually think I'm already on their list. I think they republished a few of my articles. So I mean, this is like the Gestapo. I mean, it's not a public, literal, legal group, but they operate as sort of the gendarmes, the shock troops. Now, having said that, they are, like a lot of these groups, you can say the same thing about Hamas. They have some good things they do. They do expose some bad people, yes. But the real, when you scratch the surface, it's not an honest and objective group. They are there to attack. They don't criticize, they don't investigate like Antifa or radical elements in BLM.
I don't think you're saying they perform a relatively base service as a function, and then above and beyond that, they serve as basically a political hitman for their opponents. But they perform a base service, like the ADL. If you try to force a guy to act in the Christmas tree, act in your local Christmas tree, play at public school, or if some Jewish kid gets beat up in some random place, fine. They could probably call the ADL, and I mean they may not
do a good job,
but they'll do something. But at the same time, the ADL will use their power to take down their enemies, and the SPLC is like that too. But it's saying if you believe in the SPLC's main mission is these voter registrations. So Jocelyn Benson, working for the SPLC, she took it upon herself to run for office and won, and had the law changed exactly the way that the SPLC had been recommending for decades. And whether on the same side, she would, so to say, use that power to, to try to destroy the people like you even. I don't know. And you're saying, God forbid.
That's right. They will do that.
But that is kind of her right, as that is the way the U.S. system. I'm saying within the law that the U.S. system is built in a certain way that's why people run for office. And that's the spoil system, that now that she's in office, she gets to use her power to try to destroy people like you.
Within legal bounds, and yes, I get that it's power, and that's why we have constraining governments. The question is, has she overstepped her powers? And we have a system that can check that. But I think that what you're describing in Michigan with Benson and with the SPLC and her changing laws, even up until the last minute, and possibly without that kind of authority.
Well, I mean, the question, was she colluding? Like, is she getting a phone call from George? I don't think it's George Soros, but it's saying, was she getting a phone call from somebody?
I would
and who was that person that was giving her that phone call?
We can't prove it,
as citizens deserve to know that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the answer to that question is probably she got marching orders from somebody like a George Soros. We can't prove it. We don't know. But even if she didn't, she did in the de facto sense, because she thinks just like George Soros. It's like my communist uncle once said to my father. My father asked him about how is it that you're communist? You're a member of the Communist Party. Do you get your marching orders from the Kremlin? What is it, Stalin call up, on the phone? And he said, no, we don't get marching orders because we don't need them. We all think the same way. And that's how this works. It's kind of like a headless revolution. She doesn't need to hear from George Soros. She just knows what to do because they all think the same way. It's like they have a computer chip embedded in the back of their skulls.
Well, I mean, she went to Wesleyan and Harvard. She was trained.
That's right.
Even if she came from a conservative, her parents actually looks like were involved in special education. So she might have even had a childhood mission, and she might, have some sort of, even like Judge Barrett, who, kept, regarding abortion, God forbid, who kept and loves and takes care of a child with medical problems that, Benson might have, even as a child, like this was her, as a young girl, growing up, like the Queen's Gambit movie, like this was what she wanted to do and knew she was going to do. But certainly from the day she entered Wesleyan to Harvard Law School, they definitely trained her to do this. And
she had her training for sure. She had her, her
and she beat Jared Kushner. I'm saying Jared Kushner bought his way into Harvard. Jocelyn Benson, she really paid attention to what they taught her. I mean, if that makes sense,
No, that does
Jared
make
Kushner
sense.
just bought his way through, and he made a bunch of money, but she actually paid attention to what the professors were preaching.
You can say that about a lot of people, but anyway, what she's done then in Michigan, and I would suggest it's subversive, even though it's legal. You can take a look at any of these so-called swing states, with one exception. But by swing states, I'm talking Georgia, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada. And you see a similar pattern. You see people who change laws 2 days before the election. You see funny business going on at the polls with, Sharpies, so that ballots will have to be counted provisionally. You see stuff, the usual tricks. And in the broader sense, you have this question that's being brought up by Sidney Powell, who, by the way, just filed the Kraken in Michigan and Georgia with regard to this Dominion software and Smartmatic partnership, which he says goes back to Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, that's being financed and manipulated by foreign powers, including possibly China, and that has in it algorithms and a backdoor to allow for them to manipulate the electronic vote and other things like that. You have the same pattern in all of these states. The one exception, and I don't know how they got away with it, was Florida, because that's obviously a swing state, and yet it went for Trump early. I don't know how they let that one go. I know Texas, did not accept the Dominion software. But we know that Dominion software was openly involved and caught defrauding the vote in Antrim County in Michigan, and it was used in over 40 other counties. So, you say, well, to the victor go the spoils. They won the election, so they get to do this. But that doesn't mean that they get to, completely and outright break the law. And there are moral questions and ethical questions involved here. Now, yes, you could tell me it happens on the other side, and it probably does. But, and I would hope that liberals would call it out when it does. I mean, it's interesting that they're being so silent, because I remember back when I think it was Bush, won, liberal left wing hosts like Tom Hartman and David Packman, they kept doing program after program about voter fraud and about elections, and electronic machines being controlled by Republicans. And, when I heard that at the time, I was like, fine, let's look into it. So, I mean, yes, it depends on whose ox is being gored. But look, in this case, I think it's reached a level that is unprecedented, and it should be investigated. Anyway, Dooovid.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, but it's not really my issue, and I think God runs the world, and at the end of the day, it's like I said, the path of the righteous. Like maybe Jocelyn Benson is maybe a genius, and there's a lot of geniuses out there, and geniuses that waste their genius is most geniuses squander it for nothing. And of those that do something with it, a lot of geniuses, will attempt to sin and get away with it, womanize, some maybe make money or enter politics, but to actually turn towards religion or righteousness is one of the least expected options of someone with genius you would take. And I don't know if maybe we could talk about Rabbi Sacks, a blessed
Yes,
memory,
I wanted to ask
who
you about
passed away.
Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, the chief rabbi of England, Britain, as a great man, author of many books.
I was a call on here in Detroit, Rabbi, I think J.J. Schechter of Yeshiva University, very big rabbi, did a call in Detroit, just talking about Rabbi Sacks and his accomplishments, and Rabbi Sacks not coming from a really rabbinic background of kind of like simple Orthodox Jews struggling to be Orthodox, but somehow raises. He said, when he didn't have a typical rabbinic career, and when he got appointed the chief rabbi of England, it's not really a rabbinic post, that it doesn't have anything to do with the Jewish community. Mm-hmm. It's like I was mentioning Rabbi Balkany, who was like he was actually head of a girls' school, but he was more rabbi to politicians and got people out of prison. And his main constituents was the royal family and official functions. And he saw that he would be a rabbi to Goyim, and directed his message to Goyim, and accomplished what Rabbi Schechter said was unimaginable. And I thought, I was saying on your last show, because the Jennifer Church of Entropy took a meme. I was telling Charles in his book, like it's my meme now. It's like, you don't get to argue with Maimonides. And there was Rabbi Sacks was in the controversy with these fiery Sparty internet preachers like Rabbi Ruvain and Rabbi Mizrahi that were attacking Rabbi Sacks, basically, saying you don't get to argue with Maimonides. And to some extent, like I saw, Rabbi Sacks was a brilliant man, but he was a rabbi to Goyim, and somewhat like an apologist in the Jewish community. When the Jewish community moves on, it's going to move on with Rabbi Ruvain and Rabbi Mizrahi. So I called that months ago, and as Rabbi Schechter mentioned, Rabbi Sacks died unusually young. He wasn't expected. He was good at health. People assumed Rabbi Sacks would be around decades more. And even, when he died, like Rabbi Sacks was helping other people. He lived who he was till the last moment, the last day, just randomly trying to be nice. And what I like to do, Rabbi Sacks debated against atheism. He debated against evolution. And from my perspective, I'm always looking at this. I had this guy on Week in Review, and he was talking about, anti-Semitism and the alt-right. And I said, why aren't I worried about this in censorship? And I told him, I am a lot more worried about evolution than I am about anti-Semites. And I think Rabbi Sacks, he probably worried quite a bit about anti-Semitism, but he probably had a greater spiritual perspective that says the greater worry is people not realizing that they have a soul and a connection to God. Please, probably the most profound conveyor of the Jewish religion in the English language.
Yeah, I mean, he wrote a book that I haven't read it. A relative of mine is actually reading it regarding ethics. That apparently is both very profound, but also very accessible to average people. It's kind of a crossover, similar to the kind of work that Abraham Joshua Heschel did in the 1950s when he wrote God's Search for Man. Uh, it became popular with Christians, became popular with everyone. It was a crossover book, and he talked about the importance of being involved in civic life and being active in moral questions. And he was like, when people asked, for example, after the Holocaust, how could God have done this? How could this have happened? I mean, it's sort of a paradox that you have a God who is the essence of good and the essence of creation, and yet why then therefore does evil happen? And his answer was, well, it's you're not asking the right question. It's not a question of God. It's a question of how man did this. How human beings did this to each other, in a sense, by turning their back on their connection to God. And so, I think that Rabbi Jonathan Sachs was one of those people also who maybe saw the broader mission of Judaism, actually, in that to be a light unto the nations and to do so by ascribing to a higher moral and ethical standard. And a
Rabbi
more,
Sachs himself said he had no intention of being a rabbi, and it was through a chance meeting with the Lubavitch Rebbe when he was in Oxford as a student. He wanted to talk to the Lubavitch Rebbe, and the Lubavitch Rebbe asked him, "What are you doing for the Jewish students of Oxford?" And Rabbi Sachs was like, "Nothing. Like, I'm trying to get an education and get ahead in life." And the Lubavitch Rebbe convinced him that he should be active in doing things for the, and that was why he became a rabbi. It wasn't, like I said, he just came from a semi-Orthodox background and was more interested in getting ahead at Oxford till he met the Lubavitch Rebbe.
well,
He
yeah. I
even has a
mean,
longer story where he, switched around his whole program. He was in California and he flew to New York and changed his whole schedule just to meet the Lubavitch Rebbe.
right. I mean, that's amazing, and that's in a sense the essence of the mission and the covenant of the Jewish people with God. I mean, that's what you try to do, David. That's what I try to do. We want to raise people's awareness of about knowing God and their connection to God and their connection to the moral and ethical precepts of the Torah, which is revealed by God, and that people. There's a lot of
What about the point
anti-Semites.
that we keep on arguing, like Rabbi Ruvain and Rabbi Mizrachi, that are giving the hardline view that Dooovid is giving? All politicians are corrupt. I don't want to hear anything about one of them being better than the next. Rabbi Sachs becomes a political rabbi and kind of sounds like you do, where he's talking about morals and ethics, and even like this woman Claire Cause, like, can you rank the Noahide religions? Like, is it better to work with a Christian or a Muslim? It seems like that's not something Jews do. We're not going to rank
Well,
the
that's
goy.
not. I mean,
Like, it's not a Jewish thing to rank the goyim.
No.
But in essence, as a political rabbi, that's what Rabbi Sachs was forced to do. He was forced to rank the goyim and say it's better for the Jews to work together with this goy than that goy. And Rabbi Ruvain and Rabbi Mizrachi, that were like hardline and saying this guy's a political rabbi. If he argues with the Rambam, he is wrong. And at the
Well,
end
but
of the
look, I mean,
day,
we got
that
into that,
Rabbi
but
Sachs he was a political rabbi. And, when he argued with the Rambam, they say he was wrong. And he did that for the benefit of the Jewish people and might brought bigger causes. But at the end of the day, we don't follow political rabbis. We follow rabbis that tell us not to trust politicians.
well, first of all, a political rabbi or not, that we don't trust politicians. We only trust God. I mean, we hold politicians to vigorous standards, and the way we do that in this republic is through the Constitution. But
We're
I
saying
was
as
saying,
Jews, we do that through Rabbi Sachs. So if you're a British
okay,
Jew and you say, well, we hold politicians, we trust God, not the royal family or whatever, but our trust is largely through an emissary that deals with that, and that was Rabbi Sachs.
I would accept that. But the thing is, in the
Like a
broad sense,
Stolderat, or what we used to call in
well, in the
Yiddish.
broad sense, I would suggest that the entire children of Israel, the Jewish people, are the emissaries from God to be a priestly sect and to be a light unto the nations. Now, the anti Semites, and even a lot of Jews, and I think we talked about this, misinterpret that context, that concept, which is the chosen people, to mean that the Jews are going to corruptly try to control the world physically and create a world government and kind of do so by means of subversion, when in fact the opposite is the case. We are not the chosen people to control anything. We are the chosen people to serve God with an extra layer of commandments. We are subordinate to the will of God, not to control any other people. But by fulfilling that mission, serving God, taking on the extra commandments, we are supposed to, by example, be a light to all of humanity so that all of humanity will come to know God. And that then you'll have the Messianic age. At least that's my understanding of it.
But I'm saying that's what we've been talking about for weeks now in terms of the Haredim in Israeli politics, whereas Dooovid is saying the Haredim are the essential message of Judaism. Rabbi Sachs is an extremely intelligent, educated person that was essentially a Jewish apologist that did his best to portray Judaism in a positive light to the Goyim. And he may have done that many times by being an apologist for Judaism. But at the end of the day, the Haredim maintained the essential message of Judaism, and Rabbi Sachs was an apologist.
Yeah, but do the Haredim maintain the essential message of Judaism when they shut themselves off from politics and they look within and they don't participate in the real world? I mean, that's not what, I mean, to my way of thinking, I think it was actually none other than Rabbi Antelman. I don't know. Are you familiar with Marvin Antelman?
Well, just from you, and you keep on mentioning him and saying this is largely a continuation of
it is.
This issue we debate basically every single time we talk.
And should continue to do so. Rabbi Marvin Antelman noted that his criticism of the Ashkenazi, the Miknadim, the Hasidim of Eastern Europe, the Polish movement, was that they were too insular, that they were looking within, that they were withdrawing from the world. Whereas he pointed out that the Sephardic Jew could be religious, could be observant, and yet can exist in the secular world with non-Jewish neighbors and interact with Jews, both Jews and non-Jews, in very normally, and not in any way be threatened in terms of who they were and their identity and their mission. And that was his criticism. And I tend to agree with that. I mean, it's not our mission to sort of build up a big wall around ourselves and shut ourselves off from the entire world. We're here to be a light unto the nations, to serve the world through moral example and through ethics and through trying to expose evil and trying to enhance spirituality and to be witnesses to God. That's the Jewish mission, I think. I mean, that's what I take from looking at the Torah. That's what I take from hearing the weekly Parsha. That's what I take from studying Talmud, which I now do occasionally by Zoom. I have this Talmud group. We're trying to raise our level of spirituality by means of doing these practical things that enhance our walk with God. And by doing so, we are to be an example to all people. Anyway, Dooovid, we're sort of reaching toward the end. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, me and Luke Ford have streamed such an enormous amount of time, maybe even over 100 hours, because he does it every day for hours, and we talk so much. But we've analyzed the Jewish halachic implications, like as an Orthodox Jew, and from modern Orthodoxy, which Rabbi Sachs represents, where the Jewish religion generally, you're saying the Haredim are the epitome of what it means to be Jewish, but the Jewish religion tells us that you're supposed to make exceptions to Jewish law in certain ways for our health and for success, like shaving or something from a pure, like in Jerusalem, like from a pure Jewish perspective, you're not allowed to shave.
Right.
But almost all rabbis agree that if it makes you more successful in what we call parnasa, in livelihood, that you not only are allowed to do it, you should do it, that you're allowed to shave in order to fit in better and have better relations with the Goyim. And the Jewish religion is designed in that way that what becomes acceptable parallels what is successful, because the Jewish law kind of says like it's more likely to be acceptable if it actually works and is successful. So if you have the perspective of, is Judaism what the collective best practices of what was successful for the Jews in the various societies that we lived, or is what Judaism is the people that resisted it. And so Judaism is the interesting religion where we're saying we're not a religion of renunciates. Generally, our religion says that people are more trustworthy. Richer people are generally more trustworthy and is elite heavy religion and has a large part of success. But then at a certain point, like, what is true Judaism? And so it's always interesting. In a lot of these issues, it takes immense amount of scholarship. Charles, author of 10 books. And I've been on these calls, Root and Branch in Jerusalem, with Lowell Gallen and Les Glassman, and this professor Yitzhak Karen. He said he has 60,000 books in his house in Jerusalem just on Sephardic Judaism. Professor, huge scholars of, could mention hundreds of cities across Europe and the world and tell you the Jewish history over hundreds of years and thousands of names, like, just one town in Europe that most people never heard of.
Yeah, I'd love to.
And the man might have thousands of names to, to mention, to understand that, how that, to say, what does it mean to be Jewish? And it's really,
we should do a 3-way talk with him, Dooovid, on this show. But, I mean, look,
it's separate for politics. I mean, these guys are also interesting, are strong right-wing Trump supporters, but generally you have to, check your politics at the door of the base medrash. But like, that's why Jews are interesting, because no Jew checks their politics at the door of the base medrash, even though we know we're supposed to.
You're not supposed to talk politics. Look, I mean, I'm by hardly claim to be a Torah scholar or anything remotely like it. But my instinct tells me that when a rabbi in Jerusalem tells someone that they can shave their beard because it'll make them more successful in business, they are doing that in a context by which it is permissible to do it and yet not violate Jewish law. Now, I don't know how they do that. I know there's a whole school in Israel that focuses on this, like how to ride an elevator on Shabbos, and this sort of thing. But it's kind of like, I mean,
because the rabbis want you to be successful. Yeah, and the religion itself is designed for people to put into, like, well, the Jewish laws here are holding me back from being successful, and Judaism wants me to be successful. So you could talk with the rabbi.
Yeah, but at the same time, they're not going to let you have ham sandwiches. Look, I mean, Dooovid, the thing I would compare it to is, like, in the Catholic Church, they used to have, and my former co-host, Patrick O'Heffernan, used to talk about his Catholic upbringing and, back in the day, where they would issue the annual list of forbidden books and forbidden movies. And it's kind of gone by the wayside. But back in the day, I mean, him and his rebellious friends would take a look at that list and they would make sure they got every one of those books. But the principle behind that was that the good Catholic was not supposed to read those books because it was the Pope had said no to them, unless they got unless they asked permission of their bishop in writing and explained why they needed to read that book. There might have been a scholarly reason, there might have been an academic, and then the Pope, the bishop, would make a decision about whether or not they could read the book. And I think that Judaism kind of works that way too, in that if you have a good reason to do a certain thing, then it's adjudicated in the Jewish mechanism, in the Jewish system.
You have to know what to answer, not be coerced. It's almost written like a commandment, and that not just like it's okay in that circumstance, but you're obligated. If someone, that's why I'm going to give a talk to this group about why I support free speech. But we actually have that statement right in Ethics of the Father that's written like a commandment. Know what to answer a heretic, and if a heretic says something you don't have an answer for, it's your obligation to answer that question as a Jew.
Right, and to do so in a manner that balances Jewish law and Torah with the reality of their situation. And
people are surprised. I've read all these heretics books. They're like, think I've read a lot more books on Judaism than from the heretics, but
you have a whole shelf of heresy behind you there.
Well, it's saying, like, you have to. Well, I'm gonna, when I talk to them, I mean, we could schedule maybe next week or a different time. You could even help me prep on it. But I was gonna say, despite rising anti-Semitism, and Jews should stand strong against censorship, and in free speech, and standing out and saying that Jews seem to be not taking that approach
No, they seem
and
to
give
be
a list of
censorious.
reasons why. And that's one of them. You're saying that it's written, straight up. Like, well, you have to, like our approach wasn't censorship. Our approach was knowing what to answer these people.
I would say that, I mean, I would bend in favor of non-censorship and answering people properly.
And I saw
Because,
Satmar
yeah,
supported that guy Rick Wiles, who had been censored. He actually gave $15,000 to pay
and I
the De
agree with that.
Blasio's fine, and they posted him. And the forward and all this, they're like, oh, they can't know he's an anti-Semite, and they know exactly who this guy is.
No, and
And
he is very anti-Jewish, and I've seen him, and that's why the ADL ban got
but there's
Michael
an
Jones banned.
overlap of interest, so that Satmar, like the enemy of your enemy, in saying to the Satmar people, they might be looking at it as like these secular Jews are a bigger enemy to us than Rick Wiles.
But maybe there is a political side to it, but from my perspective, I would rather see a Rick Wiles out there, and I would rather debate him in the public square and challenge him, because I think that by censoring him, it's only going to make matters worse, because then they actually become, they're going to get their message out one way or the other, and it leads to it leads to conspiracy theories.
I'm a chess player. You're saying like I could beat amateur weak chess players easily. It's not a waste. It's very easy. Someone's like, oh, I could beat you. It's only going to take me a little bit of time, as fast as the person moves, to demonstrate that like I'm a good chess player. So if you're saying this guy doesn't know what they're talking about, you don't need to censor them. You should be able to instantly demonstrate through knowledge that the person doesn't know what they're talking about. So the point of censorship, it actually builds it. And then you're saying like Secretary of State Benson, the SPLC, the method of censorship and then trying to ruin these people's life. You're saying, okay, we censored you, but you still believe this stuff, so now we're going to try to ruin your life.
That's right, and I mean, I'm completely against that. We need to educate ourselves so that we can debate these people in the public square with the same tools that they're using to attack us. And I just think that's the better approach. That's the free approach. That's the approach that actually diffuses lies and falsehoods and smears. Now, I think there is a point where something does cross a line. Like, for example, I don't know if you're from, I don't even want to mention his name because he's been completely censored, and rightfully, and that being Brother Nathaniel. Are you familiar with him?
Yeah, no, and I disagree. I don't think he needed to be censored. And I know
No,
he
I do
spoke to
think
Adam Green.
I think he should have been
I mean,
censored.
I would take to the extreme where I think it's
He was
even
words,
calls for violence. I would argue.
I mean, he was using.
I'm the extreme level where I think it's even better for calls to violence not to be censored. I would take it to that extreme, but on that level, Brother Nathaniel, that is like, no, you should know if these people are against you and want to do violent things, we're better off. It actually helps diffuse it to have people openly say it.
I think that you and I mean, I have to think this one through further, but my reaction is that in this case, you had somebody who was so openly and filled with hate and so vile in his rude and offensive descriptions. He wasn't debating issues of Jewish law and Jewish, it was just an outright angry assault. He, by the way, is a former Jew who obviously something might have happened. He looks back with hatred and anger. It's kind of like Torquemada, it's who had been a former Jew and then who was the head of the Spanish Inquisition. I mean,
he seemed to have definitely flaws in his worldview. I watched a little bit, and he converted to Christianity and he saw the light, but all Jews are predisposed to be bad, except for him. And then he still thinks like he was arguing with Adam Green about these things, and then he was like, oh, you can't understand, stupid goy, I'm the Jew, I understand how these Jews work.
Well, that's right, he claimed to have an inside knowledge, but he was look,
but in terms of the free speech issue, like, I mean, obviously he had tens of millions, he's one of the most famous internet personalities in the world, but in terms of the speech, like, no, I mean, I was completely against his censorship, and I saw that guy like Asmoder or something. Like I even had to be like, that guy threatened me physically instantly the first time I talked with him.
Not permissible.
And I don't even think he should be censored in that sense. Even Asmoder, who first time I ever had a run-in with him, immediately went to physical threats. I think we're better off with guys like that not being censored.
I disagree, because first of all, they're advocating criminal behavior. They're advocating violence against people. we can't. Do you want to have the Unabomber? I mean, out
Yeah,
there.
but that's a criminal. So saying if this guy it's not a question of free speech. So if this guy threatened me and I feel threatened and want to take a criminal complaint against him, it wasn't a question of his speech. The question is, did this guy criminally threaten a person? When you threaten a person, when you censor people because they're violent speech, it's like, no, either this guy committed a crime of threatening someone, he's going to get arrested for that, but it's not a speech issue.
Maybe I am coming down a little bit on the side of censorship as I think about it.
Well, you are. Because I'm telling you, even Asmoder, I don't think he should be censored.
All right. Well, I actually think that there are certain standards. What they are is something that's debated and it's questionable. But if someone is, like, for example, I wouldn't want to see somebody on the air who was attacking Black people using the N-word and, really vile kind of like anti-Black attitudes openly. So
yeah, but I want to know how you really feel. Tell me how you really feel. And saying we're going to be better off if you tell me how you really feel.
No,
and from that psychological perspective, censorship.
No, if you have like
even from crime prevention, I'm telling you from a pure strategic crime prevention point of view, is that you'll have less violent crime if you allow people to openly say violent things. No,
I don't think so. I don't know. Well, that's the question. I mean, like if you have a guy like Rick Weil who's involved with anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that are wrong and that are disprovable, I actually think that we should not censor that. We should debate that and do so openly. But if you have somebody like Brother Nathaniel who's just engaging in these ad hominem attacks on the Jewish people and calling them bad characters and using insulting language, that is beyond community standards. I'm sorry, but maybe say I'm a censor.
But pornography isn't, and saying like,
pornography is. I think pornography should be made only available to consenting adults, and it should be not so easy to get to it. I do think that pornography should be.
Yeah, censored. I mean, from my analysis on the issue is like, no, I think you have to just oppose censorship in all cases. So you, as a person who's worried, you're saying, I am a Jew and I am scared. I am scared as a Jew that if people like this are allowed to say these things, that it's going to cause the Jewish community problems.
It's not just as a Jew.
And it's saying, but you say like free speech from a perspective, you're saying that you think that there is morally a level that speech is criminal and past a certain point.
Not criminal. No, I didn't say it was criminal. I'm just saying that there should be community standards. The same community standards that we use in, you mentioned pornography.
I mean, let's say there's a person out there who hates me or you so badly that they honestly want us dead and they're willing to say it with their own name.
Then they should be charged with a crime.
No, but I'm saying that it's better that there's free speech so I could know. That I want to know this person's going to get up and say, I hate you so bad that I'm willing to stand up and use my free speech to say it.
All right. Well, listen, Dooovid, free speech is one thing if they come out and say it, but to do so in a public forum where they could influence thousands of people, that's
of course, that's your right as an American citizen.
No, I disagree. Like, for example, we protect the innocence. You mentioned pornography. We protect the innocence of children from pornographic images. Do we not? That's censorship. Do we want to have children get pornographic movies? I mean,
I'm libertarian, so like obviously I'm going to argue with you on all these issues.
All right, fine. I would argue that we have to have standards. Anyway, Dooovid, listen, let's do a program with this free speech advocate. We could do a three-way talk.
I'm becoming the free speech. No, it's me. I'm the, like they couldn't find another Jew who's a free speech advocate. So
it's me. Look, again, I consider myself to be a free speech advocate.
The only other Jew who was a free speech advocate, jumped board, changed his name. That guy, thank God I even forgot his name, who I debated, but like he was on the David Duke show. He changed his name. He rejected that he was a Jew. Like he said some pretty bad things to me. But no, I don't, there's not too many other free speech advocates out there. And I take it to the full extent where saying, yes, even violent threats should probably not be censored.
I consider myself to be a free speech advocate, but I do maybe not as much in that I think that
maybe Adam Kokesh would agree with me.
I think that free speech can be regulated within reasonable limits, and I accrue those limits liberally. Anyway, Dooovid, but where can people watch your show?
Oh, Dooovid, my channel. I've had a few guests. I had this interesting man. Maybe I could even book him for your show.
Please.
Henry Doktorsky, who lived in New Vrindavan, the famous Hare Krishna establishment in North Virginia, and he has written a 10-volume history.
Wow.
From when this madman basically, who, he's an interesting character. He's a smart man, Baptist preacher who joins the movement, buys this property, and has a vision that he's going to create the biggest Hindu temple in North America. And
this is not the movement I wanted to talk
I was saying
about.
that it involves murder and drug dealing, and Alan Dershowitz, that like this man has battles with the local North Virginians that don't really want these guys there, and he enlists the help of this murderer who defends the community. And at the same time, they successfully create the biggest Hindu pilgrimage site in North America that was somewhat created by this madman who had this vision that he was going to make this temple, and it exists till today. And then Alan Dershowitz ends up defending this man and saving him from prison. And but just anyone who knows the Hare Krishna movement, I'm sure they're in Boston. This man wrote the 10-volume, thousands of page history of their first not just temple, but attempt of establishment where these Western converts to this form of Hinduism were actually going to live this lifestyle, and they successfully built the most venerated Hindu temple in North America, and it involves drug dealing and murders and crazy stuff at the same time.
It sounds fascinating. We used to have the Hare Krishna house in Boston. I think that they left town due to several lawsuits.
The biggest guy there, his name is actually Jay Israel. He's a big scholar. He's still around today. He's written books, but the main guy from Boston was a Jewish man. His last name is actually Israel, and he's still a leader in the movement, one of their most respected scholars.
Bernie, come home. Anyway, the other movement we should talk about is this movement. It's mostly in Africa, but it is people in Nigeria, in Zimbabwe, Tanzania, who are Jewish. They feel that they are descended from either the lost 10 tribes or from the Solomonic period. They are practicing Jews. You see them in their synagogues. They have accepted all aspects of Judaism. Likewise, there's a group in India that's doing this. There's a group in Afghanistan among
you should have Professor Yitzhak Karen, who I told you had 60,000 books in his library in Jerusalem.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about it because to me it's an interesting movement that I'd like to get behind. I'd like to talk to some of the people involved in it. I think it's great. Anyways, Dooovid.
And today is actually the 12th year anniversary of the Mumbai terror attack, or yesterday was. I was checking the news.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, congratulations to them.
No, I'm saying the negative, God forbid, the Mumbai terror attack in India 12 years ago.
Oh, never mind that. Yeah, that's horrible.
That was the 12th anniversary yesterday.
They murdered the Chabad couple. Yeah, horrible. That was evil and
Hanukkah's coming. I saw my local Chabad rabbis are doing drive-in menorah lightings.
We have in Boston.
I told you Nate Lewin, that Judge Barrett worked for Nate Lewin.
You did, yeah.
But we won that Supreme Court case. We didn't even talk about that. I meant to. The Gudas Yisrael won their case in the Supreme Court this week, and here we're Hanukkah's coming. No one wants to get COVID-19. So we're having drive-in.
We have the drive-in Hanukkah mobile in Boston. They sweep you off the street. Are you a Jew? They bring you in. They wrap to fill in.
Well, not this year with COVID-19. But I'm saying that they're renting out a big parking lot, and they're going to have the menorah celebration so that people could stay in their cars.
Good. Well, that's innovative. I'm glad to know it. All right, Dooovid. So I'll talk